it safe?
It won't look as nice.
It will be as intended, and then I will set up the breakout rooms once everybody's, well, once
Yeah.
everybody's in, and then I'll redo them.
All right. I think we're gonna have 25 people tops
Hello,
tonight.
friends. Guess
Richard,
Yeah.
I can hear
Hey.
you, but I can't see you.
I can't see myself either. It's not showing my I don't know why. So when I turn off my video, that's what it shows. When I turn it on, that's what it shows. Let me
Uh,
come out and go back in.
yeah,
See what's
drop
going
out
on.
and rejoin.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, we have 10 in the waiting room right now. Those are
See,
just
Richard will jump back into the waiting room, so just monitor to see if he's
Yeah, I'll watch
comes
that.
back in. There's a great footnote in here. Him and Carmen are both mentioned in the same footnote.
Oh, I love
I
that.
shared it on my Instagram today. I was like, when my two favorite people are quoted in my favorite book.
Yeah. Photo worthy.
Oh, for sure. And they weren't in the first edition. So that's what's nice.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Lots of improvements in the second edition, including that he's not back yet. But I can just admit everybody if you want, since it's technically 7:01. Or do you want me to wait and give you a chance to?
No, we go ahead. You can go ahead and let him in.
Okay.
We'll
Now we're at 15. So
17.
yeah, we might.
We'll see.
You're right. We might.
I think it's gonna be low. I think it's gonna be low
Yeah.
tonight. I
Yeah.
think everybody's out getting hammered for St. Patty's. Except for the sanctified people that are here, who are popping up on my screen as we speak.
Yep.
Little faith, right? Little faith.
The faith of a mustard seed and the book club of a mustard seed. That's all we need.
I like your bow tie.
So this is when I go all out. This is my holiday, my people.
Yeah.
Gingers don't get much in this culture, so we have to take what we get. And I grew up in Savannah too. I was telling Cherie, Savannah, Georgia has the second largest St. Patrick's Day parade, or at least it did when I was a kid. So St. Patty's was a big deal for us. It was the
So
only
who has
day
the first?
I think it's Chicago.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Chicago.
I figured you'd have one of those costumes like the Notre Dame mascot.
So if I had a leprechaun suit, I would wear it for sure. The Notre Dame in college, I went to a place called Reinhardt. We had an intramural flag football team, and it was when I was taking the freshman graphic arts class, and so we were learning how to use Corel Draw, which is like a vector-based drawing program, and I designed our team logo inspired by the Fighting Amish, or Irish. We were the Fighting Amish, and so it was like the Notre Dame guy, but an Amish guy. And yeah, that was our flag football team. It was the closest. I wish I had made a T-shirt of it. That would have been great, but alas. And then Notre Dame knocked us out of the playoffs 2 seasons ago, so I still kind of hate them. But what can you do? I don't hate you if you went to Notre Dame. Anybody in the book club, just for the record.
So how did you end up at Reinhardt from Savannah?
So we moved. Dad was a Methodist pastor, so we moved around the South Georgia Conference, and we ended up in Macon when I was in middle school. So I did middle school and high school in Macon, and then I skipped my senior year. I had enough credits. I only needed to take one English class. So if I stayed to my senior year, I would have just basically taken one English class and 5 electives, and I didn't want to do that. All my friends were older, so Reinhardt offered early admission. If you scored a certain amount on your SATs and you had recommendations from your teachers, they'd let you in. So I went to college as a 17-year-old up in North Georgia, back when it was a college. It's a university now, but it was a little Methodist school, and they had the Blanche Hagen Scholarship for Methodist pastors it paid for barely anything, but it gave us a little bit. So yeah, so I ended up there.
So you got to stay in the big city of
Waleska, Georgia. At the time, I haven't been back in 20 years. I don't know, or 30 years. I don't know what it looks like now. At the time, there was one BP station, 4 churches, and that's it. There was nothing else.
They have done a lot of work and they have revitalized their downtown. It's a beautiful little strip driving through there.
There was literally nothing. So I would love to see it now because it was that drive from Canton to Waleska was like 6.2 miles because we'd have to go to Canton for everything other than a chicken sandwich from the BP across the street. Like we'd have to go to Canton for everything. So I got so used to that drive. And yeah, I'd like to go back and see it. My oldest nephew was going to play football there, was going to kick for their team, and then it didn't end up working out. So he left after like the first semester. He's working in agriculture now, but I wanted to go visit him just to see, like, there's my old dorm room. Does it have air conditioning yet? I don't know. Yep. All right, we're at 24. I see.
Yeah, we have a few more I just submitted from the waiting room. So
Perfect. We're getting started. And Richard was having camera problems, so he had to jump back off, jump back on again.
we can see him now.
All right. There we go. Well, I can only see like two people because of how my screen settings are, but that's why we'll have Cherie monitoring everything. Richard, we missed you last time. How's your son? Everything, he got back safe and sound?
So he was actually in a conference for his work in Florida, in the air from the conference to Jamaica when the bombing started.
Oh, wow, okay.
So as soon as he landed in Jamaica, he got these videos from friends saying, "Look what shit's going on right outside my window."
Yeah. I can
He said,
imagine. I saw one that looked insane.
so he can't go back right now. Yeah. His boss went back to get their family through Oman and drove in across the border, picked them up and flew out through Oman.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Is it Dubai or Abu Dhabi?
He's in Abu Dhabi.
Abu Dhabi, okay.
Yeah, that's where he was, yeah. They're about an hour and 15 minutes apart. They're not far apart.
I always get them confused.
So think of it. Dubai is like New York City. Abu Dhabi is maybe Albany. That's the size.
Oh, size-wise?
Something like, yes, one is really chaos and the other is more laid back.
Well, Abu Dhabi is also one of the most vocal jiu-jitsu cities in the world. The Abu Dhabi Combat Club is like the Olympics of jiu-jitsu every 2 years. So,
well, they have the best Formula One racing track too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've seen that. That's that's cool. Those of you that are just jumping on, I went all out because it is St. Patrick's Day. Although this bow tie is a little itchy, so I may take it off as we go. But David Rogers asked to see Archie, and I would bring him over, but David, you'll meet him soon. He is across the room, laying on his little pad. I took in a rescue last Sunday. There was this case in Charlotte where somebody was hoarding and like abusively hoarding and breeding over 60, I think it was like 60 or 70 Shih Tzus and small breed dogs. So all these rescues, like law enforcement had to come in and rehome dozens of dogs. And so there's a rescue here called Peanuts Place, and I follow them, I share their stuff on Facebook, and they posted a picture of an event that they were doing where you could come walk a dog at the park and like meet the foster dogs. And so I went and I met little Archie, and he reminded me so much of Ripken, my previous Shih Tzu, who I said goodbye to about 9 months ago. And so I got him Sunday because he was a rescue from a puppy mill. He lived in a cage for like a year and a half to 2 years. I think that's how old he is. And so he doesn't know how to he doesn't know how to go to the bathroom on a leash or really go for walks. He gets real nervous outside. And so we're acclimating him, but he might if he comes over here later, I'll let him have a cameo just so David, you can see him. And otherwise you will meet him because he'll be down there to Vidalia soon. He's got to meet Kirby and his grandparents. So that's going to happen. All right. We've given our little buffer zone. We're at 27. Cherie, I'm winning. I predicted we would have.
You are winning. You are winning.
So we shall see. But we have the faithful. We have the righteous remnant. Everyone, welcome. This is our Penultimate. That's a fun word that you don't get to use a lot. It means the next to the last. And this is our next to our last meeting. We're almost done with, for my money, the best biblical theology overview out there. And yeah, those of you that have stayed with the reading, congratulations. I mean, it was a pretty intensive reading schedule, and it's more than a lot of, I mean, there's some people who don't read a book this size in a year. And so we've gone through it in, 12 weeks. Yeah, be proud. Pat yourselves on the back. We're going to jump right in just a second. I would love for someone, I'm making sure the recording's good. Everybody can see. Okay. I would love for somebody, as usual, to open us with prayer, and then we will get started. Who wants to do that? Oh, but Charles just asked real quick, what is the next to the next to the last? That is the anti-penultimate. Anybody that studied Hebrew had to learn the ultima, penultima, anti-penultima. So at least I did. All right, who's going to open us with prayer?
Okay, I'll go ahead and do it.
Perfect.
Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity once again to look into the reflections of another believer upon what you are teaching us and revealing about yourself. We pray, Lord, as we reflect upon, as we learn from this, that we would indeed become deeper thinkers and deeper lovers of you and of one another. And so, Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to fellowship, even online, as we are able to think more thoughts about you. Use it to transform our hearts, our minds, our souls. And we pray these things in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And let the people say, Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, sir. Okay. So my camera is locked in on a pretty tight zoom. And what I've realized is when I'm doing it on Zoom, it doesn't respond to the clicker. So you're going to get a real close eye view of whatever page we're talking about tonight. But we're going to start. So chapter 13, this is the last chapter of part 3 of the book. And if you remember, going back to, what was the page it was on? Yeah, page 11. If you remember this, you had part 1, just setting it up, the Bible and mission. Part 2, the God of the mission. Then part 3 was the people of the mission. And so that's where we're finishing up this. What does it mean to be people of the mission? And then we're going to move on, and we read the first 2 chapters in the arena of mission. So where mission takes place. And in this chapter 13, the people of mission, it starts with, he says on page, sorry to flip back and forth, right here, the middle of the page, 397. I love this line. The good news is that God's response to our comprehensive sinfulness is God's comprehensive salvation, which affects all of those realms. And so this section, as we were reading through it, hopefully what you saw was that salvation is more than just what many, not all, but certainly many of us in evangelical circles grew up thinking, which is getting souls to heaven. Getting people to confess Jesus as Lord so their sins are forgiven, and they can, if you remember the Billy Graham tract where you have man on this side and God on this side, and there's a big chasm, and then the cross is what bridges that so man can get to God. And it's not that that's wrong. That is for sure a part of the gospel, but it's just a part of the gospel. It's not the whole gospel, because God's mission, hopefully you've seen by now, is to redeem creation, not just to get individual sinners right with God so that when they die, they go off to be with him forever. Rather, the kingdom is coming. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And then, of course, where it's all headed is the new creation, new heavens and a new earth. So he talks about this, and he uses this phrase. He uses these phrases interchangeably. He says, I may use the terms holistic and integral in more or less synonymous and interchangeable ways. And this idea of a holistic gospel is a gospel that's more than just reconciling sinners to God, but rather it's being the kingdom, being salt, being light, being a preview of coming attractions as we live in this world. So there was a discussion. It started on page 400. He started talking about why the Old Testament matters in the gospel. That a lot of people think, well, in the Old Testament, God wanted Israel to live in the land and to have all these ethical laws that they followed and be certain types of people. But now that the New Testament's come, that's all done away with. And Wright was saying, no, this is the phrase he used. This is page 400. I love this line. As an Old Testament guy, I love this line. He says, it is surely a distorted and deficient hermeneutic, and hermeneutic just means how you interpret the Bible, to argue that whatever the New Testament tells us about the mission and message of the followers of Christ cancels out what we already know about the mission and message of God's people from the Old Testament. So he spent so much time in this book, and we've seen it, walking through what the Hebrew Bible teaches, what the Old Testament teaches about how God's people were to live, and then how that guides God's new covenant people. So even though we don't live under Old Testament laws, the principles within those laws still remain because the God who gave those laws is our God. And so there's continuity and there's discontinuity. There's discontinuity in the method of how we obey, like it no longer involves a central sacrificial temple tabernacle system. It no longer involves Levitical priests. It's no longer aimed primarily at the ethnic tribes of Israel. So there's discontinuity. It's to all people, every tongue, every tribe, every people, every nation. But the continuity is the mission's still the same, to be a kingdom of priests, to bring the world back to knowledge of the Creator that they have strayed from. So this chapter is all about that. And he's refreshingly, I think, pointing people back to Old Testament ethics. Old Testament ethics matter. His other big book, we talked about this in the episode where Chris was on, that he wrote Mission of God, and then his other big book is Old Testament Ethics for the People of God. If you've enjoyed this book and you want to go even deeper, specifically into how do we interpret Old Testament laws and what relevance do they have for modern Christians, that would be the book I would recommend as a follow-up to this. It is absolutely phenomenal, and he quotes from it a number of times in this one. So that's the discussion on page 400, 402. About 399 to 402, maybe 403. That's what was going on. There's one more quote. Let me pull one last quote, and then I'm going to ask to see what thoughts you guys had on this section. Right here, this is page 402. This whole section is great. It's all about why the Old Testament matters, and particularly what we're to do with it. And I love what he says here. He says, there's no hint at all that the ubiquitous message of the Old Testament about God's demand for social and economic justice, about personal and political integrity, about practical compassion for the needy, is in any sense provisional or dispensable. And that's something that I think it's incredibly important, because so much of our concepts as new covenant believers, our concepts of things like justice, like creation care, like holiness, righteousness, economic justice, as we saw with the Jubilee in our last discussion, those principles, those are derived from the Hebrew Bible. When Jesus or Paul or James or Peter wanted to make an ethical point, they would almost always ground it in the Hebrew Bible. Not saying, so you have to keep all the laws of the Hebrew Bible, because there's, again, continuity, discontinuity, but this is the type of God that we serve. And everything that the prophets teach us about things like justice or hypocrisy or care for the poor or greed or any of those, it's still relevant. It's still like a guiding principle. And he talks about that, about using or seeing the principles that are involved in those laws and then bringing those into our modern day setting. We have a section about this in Bible for the Rest of Us. If you have not done that course yet, it's free on the channel. And the section Shrimp and Tattoos is what it's called. How do we interpret Old Testament laws? Can I eat shrimp and get a tattoo, or do I follow those laws? So let me open it up, and Cherie can help me see if anybody has questions, because I can't see y'all. Did anybody have something about this section that they found was interesting, challenging? Maybe you disagreed, or maybe you have question. Are there any?
We're okay in the chat right now, unless someone throws one
All
in there.
right.
So
At the very end on page 10, right before Jesus in the early church, page
403.
403. Yeah.
Yep.
Right, that very last sentence. Whole Christian mission is built on the whole Christian Bible.
Yes, that's a great sentence. And this is something that people sometimes seem to forget. Did I tell you about? I don't know if I told this story when I was discipleship pastor and we had to buy Bibles. I don't know. I can't see if you're nodding or not.
I don't remember hearing it on here.
Okay, so when I was the discipleship pastor at the church that I was at before my current one, and this is 24 years ago, and I was in charge of buying. We just built a new sanctuary, new worship center, and we had to get Bibles for it, and so I was in charge of buying the Bibles for 800 seat sanctuary. And one of the things that I don't remember how it came up, but it was like either they were on sale or you could get a deal or something for New Testaments, like New Testament with Psalms and Proverbs, of course. For some reason, they always throw those in. And I just remember saying, we're never going to spend money on buying New Testaments ever, because if you're going to give someone, even they were like to hand out for evangelism, I was like, that's saying, I want to tell you about the gospel. Here's the last 23% of it. If we're going to buy Bibles to stock the worship center or to give out, to put in the Sunday school rooms, or we're going to buy Bibles and we're going to spend the extra money on it, because otherwise you're not giving people all of God's word. And so, so this line, this was, I was reading this book around that time, and it was like solidifying that for me, that conviction even more so. It's like, give them all of Scripture. And as a church, give all of Scripture. So to this day, I will never pay money for a New Testament, unless it's a Greek New Testament and it's, very technical, specific study thing. But just in terms of a Bible, it's not the Bible. It's part of the Bible. But anyway, that's a little soapbox. I don't want to get on it too much. Before we move on, any other? That was a great, I can't see who pointed that out, but whoever pointed that out.
That was John from Alabama.
John, great catch. Were there any other lines jumped out to anyone else?
Hey, JM.
Oh, we got two. Who just said, hey, JM, and then who just said, I did have one? Let's go in that order.
All right, that was me, I guess, first.
Okay.
I like the quote from Gorman on page 421. It in the middle it starts, if Paul does not or does not frequently explicitly tell his communities to speak the gospel, it is because, like a dog, a community in Christ cannot help but bark.
Yes.
Dogs bark by virtue of being dogs. They do not need to be instructed to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Paul believes ultimately the gospel as divine power ensures a community filled with the gospel and thus with the Spirit of God will in fact bear witness.
Yes. That's a great quote. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I had that one highlighted, but I didn't write it in the ones I wanted to share because I was condensing. Yes, absolutely. I love that. And not just because I'm training a dog right now, but because of you do what comes naturally. And that's what should be coming naturally to us. I guess we would say supernaturally.
We have three hands now. We have Richard and Kathleen and Ryan.
Okay. Whoever said the next one, do that one, and then Richard, and then Kathleen.
Yeah, who spoke? Was that you, Ryan? That kind of spoke
that
up?
That was me.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was the first page there where we were going over that quote about God's response, his comprehensive salvation. JM, you might be able to help me remember which it was, either in Out of the Silent Planet or Paralandra, that is a CS it's a quote from one of those two, and I can't remember which one, but something along the lines of like, despite the fact that our Earth, Earth was kind of separated from in that book, the rest of the cosmos in a way, it still what it allowed for was God's most like one of his greatest works, so his greatest work, which was becoming man and coming to Earth and doing that saving work. It just kind of reminded me of that connection, and just I feel like paints a really great picture of, I guess it would be God's sovereignty, in that, like, we, for better or for worse, we are kind of invited into this mission, but he will always have the upper hand in his actions, and will drive it forward regardless. I just felt like that was a good kind of, imaginative, creative way to sort of apply this passage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that might be touched on in Out of the Silent Planet, but it's very much a key moment in Paralandra when Ransom and the Unman has him in this, what seems like a checkmate, that and then he realizes, wait a minute, no, yes, the human Adam and Eve's actions were wrong, but yet God still accomplished his goal and did it in a way that you talked about, which was he Moeldo became a man, is what they say in that discussion. And absolutely, totally agree that the sovereignty of God, that's what keeps the mission. That's what keeps it from being all on us. Sometimes people, when they put like good, well-intentioned preachers will want to fire people up and motivate them to evangelism. And it almost becomes, and I've heard sermons that get into, if people die and go to hell without hearing the gospel or whatever, it's your fault. And their death is on your hand. And it's almost like, well, wait a minute, now hold on. That God's not going to look at someone who would have responded favorably to the gospel and say, oh no, so-and-so didn't preach to you, so you go to hell. Like, it's holding the tension. Yeah, we're called to engage in the mission, but we're not, it doesn't depend on us. We get to be part of it, but ultimately it's God, it's his mission, it's his sovereignty, and it's a hard balance to maintain, for sure. Okay, there were two other hands, right? Two people had their hands raised.
So am I next?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Richard.
I do want to point out that on page 403 over to 404, he's got a section at the bottom called Dissolving the Sacred Secular Assumption. So given that I have been writing on this since 1984, I can correct something he said.
Yes. All right. Let's hear it.
This typical modern dichotomy between politics and religion, the secular sacred divide, that is actually not modern. So there are two ways to look at it.
Okay, wait, what page, Richard? Give us the exact
bottom
page.
Of 403, bottom of 403.
The bottom of 403.
Yeah, dissolving the sacred secular assumption. First, we need to get back behind the typically modern dichotomy between politics and religion, the secular sacred divide. That is not at all modern. So maybe what he's getting at is this. N.T. Wright, in his Gifford lectures, spoke about, in the 19th century, biblical scholars and theologians recaptured the Epicurean distinction from Greeks, the Greek philosophical distinction, that the gods have nothing to do with life on earth. And in that sense, that's a modern thing that was recaptured, that there's no commerce. The gods do their thing, we do ours. Don't tell us what to do. But the sacred secular divide goes back to the patristic period, where the church fathers use Platonism that says that there is a higher realm that we should aspire to. It's not that there's no commerce between the higher and the lower, but life on earth is really not that important. That's what he would be calling the integral mission, right? Or the holistic gospel. But we must transcend it to be with God, and that's the spiritual. So it's not that there's no connection, but there's a higher lower, and so that distinction is not at all modern. That's the one thing that if you know history. So I did my master's degree in philosophy. I read Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, all these people in Greek. And this is an ancient distinction between the sacred and the secular that the church took over by about the 3rd century. And it's been with us a long, long time. Minor correction there.
Well, let me ask you that, because this, then how I read it, and maybe I was reading him wrong. My initial reading of it was he was, at least in this section, because this is about Jesus and politics, was referring to, is he not referring to the concept in the ancient world that, like, excuse me, that let me ask this, are there instances in the ancient world where people in political positions did not inherently use religion to back that? Like, in other words, like that they were religion, and only in, my understanding was post-Enlightenment, particularly America, and other colonial, whatever during that time, was when the idea of separation between church and state as a policy or as a government policy. Is that
so church and state is a different question. That's about 2 organizations.
Right. Which is, that's what I thought he was talking about. That's not what he was talking about here?
No, it's broader than that.
Okay.
It's that if you are a Christian, you don't get involved in the political realm at all. Because a Christian is not only involved, of course, in the church. The Christian is involved in all sorts of other things, but we must do that in a way that we don't get politically involved. So maybe that issue is particularly relevant to the evangelical church in the last century. But the sacred secular divide is very, very ancient. And I'm not saying that people did not use religion to ground their politics in the ancient world, even in the early Christian centuries. But the ideal became, this is the contemplative ideal of the church desert fathers and the monastic movement, to escape the world. So politics is beneath us. It's not that we don't get involved in that. That dirties your hands. And that's part of what's influenced the modern evangelical tradition, to say that's really not important. That's the way I was taught.
Would that have to do with Augustine's City of Man, City of God?
That's one version of it. That's one version of it. Yeah.
I've never actually read City of God. Surprisingly, it's one of those books that
it's long.
It's very long. That's why I haven't read it.
So I love Wright, but just to correct a few historical things like that.
Yeah, well, that's good, because that's exactly what we're about to go into, is that whole question of politics. But let me make sure, did Kathleen have
Well, that's what I had a question about, so maybe you want to cover it first.
Okay, yeah, let's do that, and then keep whatever question in mind. If we don't answer it, by all means, ask it. The next section, again, this is right before what Richard pointed out, the line, he's questioning, is it true that Jesus did not get involved in politics? He says, that depends what we mean by politics. And this section, I thought, was his summary, his focus seems to be saying, in modern evangelicalism, people say, well, anything that, once you start preaching about, things like justice or economic ethics or, anything like that, you're getting involved, you're getting political. And we don't need to do that. Remember, the goal is to get souls to heaven when they die. So just preach the gospel. I know nothing but Christ and him crucified. Like, that's the only thing that you're supposed to preach. And once you start talking about worldly things, then that becomes getting political. And so that's what I feel like he's pushing back against in this section, is saying, actually, the gospel is incredibly political. Like Jesus, he says, on the bottom of page 404, Jesus was not crucified for being gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He was crucified because that's what you did to those who posed a serious political threat to the ruling powers. And whether it was Rome or whether it was the Jerusalem leadership, Jesus was very much a socio-political threat to them, as were all the prophets. All the prophets in Israel, their message, like people like Amos, Habakkuk, their message had incredibly convicting socio-political applications. They would speak to things like economic justice. They would speak to things, they would go beyond just personal piety and morality, but they would get to, as a society, this is what you're doing, and God hates it. And they would even condemn the pagan nations, the ones who were not in covenant with God. They would still be condemned for doing the things that in God's common grace all of humanity knows are wrong. So what Wright's doing in this section is, I think the way I sum it up when I was making notes of trying to wrap my mind around the overall thrust, was he's saying there's a difference between Jesus' kingdom politics and modern partisan politics. And so for followers of Jesus, everything has political implications if you're using politics in the sense of like politics comes from the word polis, the Greek word for city. And politics is just city life. Like how do you run a community, whether it's a small town, whether it's a metropolis, whatever. The gospel has implications for that. And Jesus rubs up against both sides if you live in a dichotomous political culture like ours is, Republican, Democrat, or if you're in a parliamentary, maybe you have more options, more parties. Jesus is always challenging something that any secular power holds dear. And so the challenge, I think, in this little section, the challenge is for us to be, the meme is, don't follow the elephant or the donkey, follow the lamb. And I actually think there's a lot of truth. I mean, I think that's exactly right. It's a little overly simplistic, but the idea is kingdom ethics should be our North Star. And then that may at times lead us into something that, like for instance, every week on social media, I get called either a fundamentalist bigot or a woke liberal. I mean, it just depends on what side of the aisle somebody is. But it's because I feel like the gospel does not agree with either side all the time. And then when you push back against it, you're going to upset people. So that's how I read this section. Is that what you were going to ask about, Kathleen, or what were you going to ask?
No, I've been a little frustrated through whenever he mentions politics, it feels like he doesn't really clarify how this plays out in our day, like what our daily life should look like. Because I also, when I think about Jesus being political, I think he was political in a kind of a passive way. Like he said, or the disciples that followed him, they would not say that Caesar was Lord,
Right.
But other than that, Paul told them to live quiet lives and don't bother people and pay your taxes. And so I'm having a hard time rectifying what Paul said with his view of Jesus. I don't view Jesus as radically political, I guess, just because I'm thinking of politics today, and how that is. So, I understand that I, as an individual, need to practice justice and mercy and help the poor whenever I can. But I don't quite understand how my politics plays into that. I mean, I just feel like I should vote for who I think's going to take the best care of the country.
Right.
And what my ideas of justice are and mercy might be different from somebody else's in that regard. But I don't quite understand, like when he talks about the temple or the cathedral having a room where people can do their politics. What is he talking about? What does that look like?
That's a good question. Let me open that up and see what we'll do a little mini discussion time here, because that's a really good question. Let me make one clarifying point. Part of it is Wright is British, and so British politics and American politics are very different. And so if he were to give specific examples, it would be limited to whichever culture he's writing to. He also lived and taught in India for a number of years, and Indian politics is a whole different thing as well. So I think some of the generality that he's remaining at is so that he can present the framework or the concept or the principle, and then let you ask the very question that you just asked. What would this look like in my setting? How would I be guided by that? And I think that's a fantastic question. We're going to actually spend some time talking about that in the breakout time. But what a others in here have to say in response, or how would you answer Kathleen's question? Jump in. I see Richard's got a hand up, and I see Lauren.
Lauren was before me, so I'll go
okay. All right, Lauren, do you want to respond to that?
I guess the passage I understand about how far do we go, and people, the whole Christian nationalists and all the stuff that's out there politically gets really kind of muddled. But the verse, or what he wrote at the bottom of 404, just before the end, and it says, Jesus was not crucified for being gentle Jesus. He was crucified because that's what you did to those who posed a serious political threat to the ruling powers. And I found that to kind of focus my thoughts on that.
What do you think, Richard? What would you bring to it? I think that's a good point. That line in particular, we both keyed in on it because that's the right one in terms of where he's headed. What do you think, Richard?
Yeah. I don't want to jump too far, but I know I think it's the next chapter or the chapter after that has a little diagram that the
Israel and the
government,
land, the pyramid.
Exactly. That's why I'm trying not to jump too far, but anyway, God's kingdom, it pretty much, our government mimics God's kingdom, or it should, in the long term. So like somebody said in the comment, it's kind of like what we have today is kind of like a degenerate version of what God's kingdom should be. So he has a government, it's just not democratic. So, and he has standards, which ours today is of kind of like a degenerate version of a standard. So that's my.
Okay. That's it. Yeah, the diagram that Richard's talking about on page 427 in the next chapter, and we're going to get to that very soon after we wrap up this part of it. So who else? How would you? This is a good question. I want us to maybe kick it around a little bit, and if we aren't able to do as long a breakout time tonight, if we have to do like 20 minutes or something, then that's fine, because I think this is worth unpacking a little bit together.
I'm not sure how to raise my hand, but for that, so on page 406, towards the end of the middle, he says that our mission is dependent on God's. His is the kingdom and his is the justice. Our mission is to seek both in all that we do in our life and work. So maybe my response to that would be, am I seeking God's justice and kingdom in my own life? And how am I doing that? So not necessarily politic related, does that make sense? But like in all of my life.
So here's yes, I think that's a good point, and that's a great line from the book. What I would think Wright would say to this is, there's no divide between your politics and your ethics. In your politics is just how you think your ethics should be lived out in the political arena. So for instance, in America, sometimes we think, oh, well, our only job is to vote. So we just vote for the person we want to have office, or what most Americans do, we vote against the person we really don't want. And then we're kind of like, okay, we're done. What Wright is saying is, like, actually, politics transcends all of that. Like, what do you care about? What are you passionate about? What do you tell people about? How involved do you get in alleviating things that you see in the world need to be alleviated? And that'll look different for everybody. And we won't even agree on the solution. Like, so take a problem, a big level problem, like immigration. He had a lot to say about the Old Testament ethic of the immigrant, the sojourner. So we should all of God's people should agree that we have an obligation to do what we are able to help people in need. That should not be a controversial thing. We should help people in need. Where we're going to disagree is what's the best way to do that? Is it something that governmentally it should be handled, and that means it's handled through taxes, or it's handled through certain policies, or it's handled through certain immigration thing? Or does that mean it should be entirely done through the church and the government should have no role in it, and people shouldn't even be having to give money to the government because then they can give more to the church so that the church can do like those aren't disagreements on should we care for the immigrant. Those are disagreements on how should we care for the immigrant. What's the best way? What's the best policy? And that's where Christians will always disagree. But the overall point is it's all political. How you interact with people, that's a political thing. We're just used to thinking of politics as how you vote, what party you put a bumper sticker on your car to support, what social media memes you share. Like we just kind of, anyway, that's what I thought. Who had that? I can't see the screen. So
Richard does. Richard's got his hand up again.
Can I follow up on what you're saying there?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
So the modern categories that we have inherited from the Enlightenment are we live on either at the individual level or at the state government level, as if there's nothing in between. Sociologists have talked about how we've lost the idea of community, that people act in community in small groups, whether in a church, in a business, in a community center, in any kind of organization. And we can, all of that is political, having to do with the polis, the grouping of people, how we live together. And we can do a whole lot in small areas between individually, how you vote. And that's the government also, right? And let them just do everything. But so what do we do as, we are Christians not just when we gather for worship in an institutional church. I've known Christians who gather together and they developed, for example, a business. And in that business, they would buy homes and they would renovate the homes, sell one home for a profit, use it to renovate another home and sell it without a profit to people who couldn't afford it. They did that back and forth till they renovated a whole neighborhood and got an award from the city. That was political. But it was not partisan politics, but they were acting communally, living out of their Christian vision. That's just one example.
That's a great example. Yeah, how you do business. My brother-in-law, he and I went to Gordon Conwell together. We started the same semester, and he was getting his MDiv knowing he was not going to go into ministry. He was going to go back and be a business person, but he wanted to focus on how do I do ministry in the business world. And so he and my sister moved back to Georgia and had their kids, and he does things like that, like I think the last one he was doing was bought a trailer park, fixed it up, like kind of made it nicer. And then instead of just renting it to people, he does the rent to own, like gives it reduced rate. The goal is for young families or first-time homeowners to be able to build up equity and to have. So it's a goal, like it's a kingdom goal, but it's being done in a sociological, political setting through business. That's gospel. That's gospel. Yeah, that's part of God's mission, which in the next chapter is really going to get into it. Were there any other hands up?
Not at the moment, but Charles, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
I think I'd be repeating a lot of other people if I did,
Okay.
but it's useful to know how to raise my hand by using the back button. Yes.
Just in case anybody else is wondering the same thing, if you're not sure, first of all, if you don't know how to raise your hand, feel free to just jump in. We're not going to kick you off the Zoom. But if you do need to know how to raise your hand, down in the tray, if you just hover, assuming you're on a computer, down in the tray, just hover, there's a react button, your react option. If you click that, it'll give you the option to raise your hand. So for those who need to know that. And then also, if you don't have the chat open, maybe click on that because there's some good comments in there. And then also Kathleen, so you had a comment in the chat where you had asked the question, well, then how is what we're talking about, how does that jive with the admonition to live a peaceful and quiet life? And are you contrasting that more with activism when you think of politics? Is the idea that we should be more so activists and that's what you're pushing back against? Has anything we've discussed clarified that for you or been helpful?
Well, a couple of people mentioned this quote that Jesus wasn't crucified for being gentle, Jesus meek and mild. He was crucified because that's what you did to those who pose serious political threat to ruling power. And I'm contrasting that with what Paul said about living a quiet, peaceful life. Those are the two that I'm trying to wrap my head around.
There's one thing to keep in mind is when Paul says that, I believe, at least I know on another occasion, it says, in as much as you're able, you should do this. And Wright talks about this, I want to say in the next, I think in 2 chapters, but it might be this one. I don't know. It all runs together. The idea is, so here's an example. When I go to India, I used to go to India most years and work with village pastors in the area where there was the most persecution back around 2006 or so. There was the missionary Graham Staines and his 2 young boys were sleeping in their car overnight, and Marxist Hindu radicals surrounded the car, doused it, lit it on fire, killed them both. Then there was a pogrom in the region of Kandhamal in the Orissa state where like 50,000 Christians were displaced and their churches were destroyed. And literally my friend's wife, he was here in America, his wife had to go flee and live in the jungle for, a couple of days. And so there was heavy persecution. So part of the challenge, and India has only gotten worse on the religious since Modi's government came into power. Modi is the prime minister. He supports Hindutva, which is kind of like the Hindu version of Christian nationalism. India is a Hindu country. It needs to stay a Hindu country. That means these Christians, these Muslims, they need to be gone. And so there's this reality that Indian Christians, especially in Orissa, now it's called Odisha state, they had to live with is like, we don't want our churches are in danger of being burned down. Like we are in danger of being ostracized at best, killed at worst. How do we live like that? And so if someone's giving guidance to churches in that region, the guidance would be, hey, you don't need to go out with a megaphone into hotbeds of Hindutva radicalism or Modi's party, the BHP, I think is the name of the party, whatever the party is. You don't need to go in there and start denouncing the Hindu gods. You don't need to preach against Shiva and Ganesh and any of this stuff in order to preach the gospel. Is in as much as you're able, pay your taxes, be good neighbors, do good deeds to your Hindu neighbors. There's no reason for you to stir up any more animosity because it's already going to come because you refuse to embrace, in this case, Hindu nationalism. And I feel like that's very similar to what Paul was telling the church in Rome, was like, you already embrace Jesus as Lord, which means Caesar is not. So there's no need to compound that by not paying your taxes, by stirring up sedition, by doing something that the authorities, who are already going to be suspicious of you, will make them even more suspicious of you. Like there's a missional evangelical,
You're gonna go get Jack?
what's the word that I'm trying to think of? There's
Is Mama going to get
like
him?
a practicality
Right now?
that you're supposed to be doing. So effectiveness, strategy, that kind of
I
thing.
don't know. I was just asking if you
So,
wanted
all right,
to
who's
come
not
to
muted?
put on, put it on.
Who can I hear?
I know, I'm trying to find it and mute it here.
Whoever, somebody mute your background. So anyway, it's strategic, I feel like. So when Paul is telling the Thessalonians and the Romans to do those things, I don't think he's telling them to not be living the gospel, to not be doing. I think he's basically saying you're gonna be targeted eventually. Like you worship a crucified, risen Savior who shows that all the other gods of this world are false. That's going to bring its own opposition. So no need to compound that. In as much as you're able, live good lives, live quiet lives, strive to provide, be the type of person somebody would want to be neighbors with, even if they hate your religion. I feel like that's I don't know. So anyway, Kathleen, that's what I think's going on there. If anybody else has another take on it, feel free to chime in.
It reminds me of
in Corinthians when Paul says, if the unbeliever, he's talking about divorce, but he says, lays out all these things for marriage. And he says, but if the unbeliever leaves, let them go. You're called to live in peace. You don't have to kick up a fuss and make a scene and protest and, angry and whatever. Get them over the head with the Bible. Like, you're called to live in peace. Let them go. It's kind of that same principle it makes me think of.
Yeah. I think this is where all the different views that people have on what is and what is not strategically important are going to come into play. And some of the stuff we've talked about before, like even little examples. I think we mentioned in one of the sessions, like, can Christians celebrate Halloween? Right? Like, there's an argument for and against. For some people, celebrating Halloween is a way to interact with their neighbors, to be a good neighbor, to have fun with their kids, to strengthen those community bonds. And it doesn't have any notion of idolatry or darkness or Satan or any of that. It is, they're doing it as a part of holistic mission. But for others, like for instance, my brother-in-law, who I mentioned, while he was in seminary studying how to do ministry in the workplace, he was doing his mentored ministry at Salem United Methodist Church in Salem, Massachusetts, which is the epicenter of Wicca in this country. And so for people in that church, celebrating Halloween there were very different things at stake, because they weren't just doing it. For a lot of people, it wasn't just a fun thing. It had very specific religious, spiritual connotations. And so they had to be much more careful in their decision. Do I participate? Because they have a huge Halloween party in downtown Salem every year on Halloween, and people dress up, and it's like Mardi Gras, basically. Do I go down there? Do I go down there and confront people? Do I open our church doors and give them hot cider and hot chocolate all night and give them a space if they'd like to pray or have somebody to talk to? That's the approach that his church did. Others would go down with a bullhorn and preach and do evangelism, apologetics, antagonism. Those are questions where I think Christians are going to come to different conclusions on, and a lot of it will be what God calls us, what he's calling you, what he's leading us to do.
May I jump in with a short comment at the risk of repeating?
Yes. Who is talking?
Charles in Dallas.
Oh, okay, Charles. Yeah, go ahead.
On page 404, thereabouts, there's a paragraph starting with a bolded label that says nonviolent is non-political.
Yes.
And it might be useful to relate what he says here about a radical political stance being not the same thing as violent politics. And indeed, in some situations, proposing nonviolence may be a more radical political agenda. The civil rights movement in this country, led by Dr. King and others, took a radically peaceful approach that really riled a lot of people up by sitting at lunch counters quietly and refusing to leave, and not getting out of bus seats that they weren't supposed to be in by law, and subjecting themselves to getting beaten up, drastically by sheriffs and police in places like Selma. That's an issue. That human rights issue, that civil rights issue, was an issue that cut across party politics. It might not today, but it did. It certainly did then. It split the Democratic Party and parts of the Republican Party as well. Where I'm going with this is that it might be useful to think about politics as involving what JM said earlier. How you live your life in a society can be considered politics: economic politics, social politics, religious politics. Those folks who wanted to be served at lunch in those diners had a choice. They could burn the diner down, or they could peacefully sit there and refuse to move and have to be hauled out by the police. That's provocative, but it's peaceful. They also served their time in jail, at least if they followed King. That's it. That's all I had.
Yeah, that's a great example. The civil rights movement. Gandhi's doing the same thing in India, which is where Martin Luther King got a lot of his inspiration for it. I have friends, many of my friends are Palestinian Christians, like Dr. Johanna Catenaccio, for instance, talks about in a Palestinian context, how do you do orthopathos, We talk a lot about orthodoxy, which is right doctrine, or orthopraxy, which is right actions. How do you have orthopathos, which is right suffering? And how do you suffer without retaliation, without embracing radicalism, without going, how do you oppose without becoming a terrorist group, so yeah, there's a lot of, there's Christians wrestling with this stuff all over the world. And this is really good. I think it's really good fodder for thought and discussion. I see Dean's hand is raised.
Yeah.
Let's have Dean, and then we're going to move on.
Sure. Just one more thing. I've really realized recently that what Richard was talking about is the Enlightenment and the categories that we have separating religious from secular life. That's artificial and very modern. And it's not at all in the language of the Old Testament. I mean, everything about just where you lived around the tabernacle in the wilderness and how daily life occurred, that was all political. It was all religious. There wasn't a separation. That was just how you lived. And in India, there's not even a word for Hindu. When they went to translate and talk about religion to them, when the Europeans went over, there was no word for it. It just wasn't even a concept to separate religion and secular life.
It was not. I think maybe I would say religion, especially in the ancient world and in many parts of the world, it's never a private thing. Like religion is an inherently public thing, and we, especially in modern culture, people say, "Oh, you can have your own religion, just don't push it down my throat." And that can very quickly become, keep your religious views at home. They don't belong in the government. They don't belong in the workplace. Yeah, that's the inherent assumption. And the Bible knows nothing of that. That doesn't mean then that you make the Bible your mission statement as a business. Like there's a lot of nuance, but at the end of the day, yeah, religion is not a private thing. It shapes who we are and how we interact with each other in the polis, in the city. So it shapes our politics. Okay,
that all jives really well with one of Richard's last comments in the chat. I'll just read it for anyone who's watching the video later. Living a life in peace does not mean we shouldn't advocate for those in need. This may disturb the peace of some people, such as those who benefit by keeping others in situations of bondage, which is kind of what you were talking about the last few minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. And even both sides of the political spectrum do it. They just pick which issues they are loud about. So for some, pro-life, pro same-sex, anti-same-sex marriage, whatever, that's what they're going to be loud about. And then the other stuff, well, the Lord can work on that, or that's, and then the flip side of that, people will be loud about war or economic justice or, racial, cultural experiences. That's a fun exercise. If not fun, but that's an important exercise if you want to do, is like look at people's public interactions and say, try to find, okay, what is the foundational principle that's driving the person's passion about this issue, whatever it is, veganism, care for the environment, sexual ethics, whatever. Like usually there's something deeper. Okay, let's move on though, because we are running out of time. I just want to point out, so he does have a discussion, 417, 418, there's a discussion about what makes something uniquely Christian, like holistic mission. How do you back up. I completely skipped over the main thrust of this chapter. On page 410 through 415, there's a discussion about the universality of the cross. Like the cross was not just dying so that people can go to heaven. He has five, the purpose of God's mission. He makes 5 points. The purpose: to deal with the guilt of human sin, to defeat the powers of evil, to destroy death, the great invader of enemy life, to remove the barrier of enmity and alienation between Jew and Gentile, and to heal and reconcile his whole creation. So this is the purpose of God's mission. So then, he says these dimensions of God's redemptive mission are set before us in the Bible. God's mission was that sin should be punished and sinners forgiven. So that's the true part of a lot of these truncated presentations of the gospel. It's definitely there. But then it goes on. Evil should be defeated and humanity liberated. Death should be destroyed and life and immortality brought to the light. Enemies should be reconciled to one another and to God. Creation itself should be restored and reconciled to its creator. This is what God aims to do, and he did it through the cross. The cross was the unavoidable cost of God's total mission. So then he goes on so therefore, on page 414, only through the cross and the power of the resurrection that declares the victory Christ won there. Only in the cross is there forgiveness, justification, and cleansing for guilty sinners. Only in the cross stands the defeat of evil powers. Only in the cross is there release from the fear of death and its ultimate destruction altogether. Only in the cross are even the most intractable of enemies reconciled. Only in the cross will we finally witness the healing of all creation. So, love this line, bluntly, we need a holistic gospel because the world is in a holistic mess. Ultimately, all that will be there in the new redeemed creation will be there because of the cross. And conversely, all that will not be there, suffering, tears, sin, Satan, sickness, oppression, corruption, decay, and death, will not be there because it will have been defeated and destroyed by the cross. So he concludes, there is no other power, no other resource, no other name through which we can offer the whole gospel to the whole person and the whole world than Jesus Christ crucified and risen. So this, to me, was one of the most powerful sections, and it keeps the emphasis, which can so easily drift when you start talking about politics, and it can drift into economic justice, it can drift into human flourishing, it can drift into whatever. I love the fact that Wright keeps it focused on the cross of Christ, which was the name of a very famous book by one of his mentors, John Stott, that I highly recommend. Okay, we've talked about this enough. We need to move on. Are there any other last comments of part 3 of the book before we move into part 4? Anything else that anything burning in your bones to say?
We do have a question in the chat from May. Wright's description of the centrality and primacy of the cross in the mission of God, forgiveness and redemption, reconciliation, all made me think about atonement. Mm-hmm. Is what Wright is saying related to PSA in regards to atonement?
PSA, for those who are not familiar, penal substitutionary atonement. This is something that one of the things that Christians like to debate theologically. A lot of times people unintentionally or just naturally limit the atonement to Jesus took my place and suffered the penalty for sin, so I don't have to. That is penal substitutionary atonement. He was punished for my transgressions. He was wounded for my iniquities. Or I might have had those backwards. So what Wright is saying is that's part of it. I mean, that was the first point in this, is that there needs to be forgiveness, and that sin, evil, fallenness really does result in actual guilt that needs to be actually forgiven. So Wright wouldn't deny an aspect of penal substitutionary atonement being part of the atonement. He would just say it's not limited to that, though. The atonement is not just Jesus making individual sinners right with God. The atonement is Jesus bringing the world, the cosmos, the world, back into right relationship with its creator. And that extends, as we're going to see in this next chapter, even into the non-human aspects of creation. So I know for a fact that he would not deny that there is an element of penal substitutionary atonement in the cross. But he would say, but that is, if anything, that's just a part of what the atonement actually consists of. It's much bigger than that. All right. Any others?
I think we're good.
Okay. So we're going to move on, and we're going to go a little bit fast here. We're going to move to part 4. the arena of mission. This is where he, there we go. Basically on 427, what he's saying is, in this next two chapters are going to spell it out, is that what God had called Israel, so that's what this section is, God called Israel to live in the land in a way that their relationship to the land and their relationship to God would altogether be what the nations look to and be a witness. That was how they would be a light to the nation, by living as God's people in God's land. So what he's saying is that has not changed. That is the continuity that remains. Only now it's not just ethnic Israel, but rather it's covenant Israel, Jew and Gentile together, all of humanity, the kingdom of God spreading to all of humanity. And it's not just the land, the geographical area of ancient Palestine. Rather, it's to the earth that God promised to Abraham, as Paul says. Paul specifically changes the land to the word earth when he's talking about the Abrahamic call. So basically, this is it's just expanded. It's just God's mission hasn't changed. It hasn't been replaced. It's just been expanded, but the implications and the mission and all of that is still the same. So that's what he is getting at in this final section of the book in part 4. And that's going to lead into chapter 14, mission and God's earth. So I love this line at the beginning. This is from Scott Sundquist. So actually the president of my former seminary, Gordon Conwell, he says the first word in a mission theology is not savior or salvation, but creation. And a lot of times people can think, when they think about salvation and saving, they think about just undoing the human thing, the human guilt and making that right. But rather it's all of creation, that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. There's an aspect to it that he's going to develop in this chapter. The gospel begins with creation, not with sinners needing redemption. Before they were sinners needing redemption, they were created in God's image. And so that's part of this holistic gospel. He has a discussion on pages 430 through 432. The earth is the Lord's, and it really brings home what he talked about earlier in the book. Israel in the land, God makes it very clear in Deuteronomy, you're just my tenants. I've given you this land the way a landlord gives somebody keys to their apartment. It's not yours, it's mine. You're living in it, you possess it, you don't own it. And that has massive implications, because he's saying now just how that was true for Israel in the land in the new covenant, that's true for all of God's people in the earth. It's not just limited to the geography of the ancient Near East. And so therefore, this whole section is a discussion of what is the role of the gospel, God's mission, in caring for God's creation. And this, unfortunately, particularly in the 60s and the 70s, the reputation arose that, Christians don't care about the environment, particularly with the rise of dispensationalism, which taught that it's all going to burn anyway. And before things get really bad, God's going to rapture his church out of the world, and then it's just going to burn. So all we need to worry about is making those numbers as big as possible of people who get taken out of this world, because it's on its way out anyway. That view really unequivocally goes against the creation care mandate in Scripture, that God calls people to have dominion over the earth, to steward it, to work and to keep it. Those are terms that were used of the priests in the tabernacle. That's what God told Adam and Eve to do, the man and the woman to do in creation. So this whole discussion is about the need for Christians to see ecology as part of the mission, because it's God's creation. Now, the danger is, and what he pushes back against on pages 433 and 434, the idea that without the foundation of gospel, without the foundation of the kingdom, we fall into error. So he talks about it's important to distinguish between personalizing and personifying nature. And that, the Old Testament frequently personifies nature. It speaks about it as if it were a person, numerous examples of that. That doesn't mean, therefore, that it's Mother Earth. That's where you leave the gospel and get into some type of maybe pantheism or panentheism or sometimes even paganism. And that's not what Christians are called to do. But that doesn't mean, therefore, that to care for the environment, to care for the earth is an inherently pagan thing. He's saying, no, it's an inherently missional thing. And so Christians should be at the forefront. It's just we're not doing it because we are one with the earth. No, we are definitely not one. We are stewards, and it's under our care. So our mission, how we care for the world, should be a reflection of how we care for the one who owns the world. And then, the second one, 434, he says one more, there's a fundamental difference between treating creation as sacred and treating it as divine. Just as there's a categorical difference between speaking of the sanctity of human life and regarding any human being as divine. The sacredness or sanctity of creation speaks of its essential relatedness to God, not its being divine in and of itself. So a Christian environmental theology is going to be very different in terms of what drives it than a secular humanist or a Wiccan or even a Hindu care for the environment. But that doesn't mean that the effects are going to be all too different. That they will both teach things like, we need to care for this earth. We don't need to exploit it. We don't need to destroy it. We don't need to poison it. We don't need to raise animals in a way that exacerbates cruelty and sees them as nothing but commodities rather than nefesh hayah, souls of life, as Scripture describes it. So there can be coalitions, there can be cooperation. It doesn't mean your motives are the same, but you can work towards the same goals. Okay, so Richard, I see your hand up, my friend. What do you have?
So I want to affirm this point that to see the world as sacred is not to see the world as divine. Very important point. I would like to just push back a little bit against the distinction between personalization and what was the term that was used? The personification.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. The natural phenomena are personified a lot in the Bible, right? The rivers clapping their hands and roaring and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think it's a function of the modern worldview to think that there's this absolute radical distinction between the human and the non-human. Because you just mentioned nefesh hayah, living organism, a term used for both animals and humans in the first chapters of Genesis.
Yep.
Human being Adam is made from Adamah, soil. We are one with the earth. So there is something, unification between us and the non-human, while also acknowledging the distinctions. But even the very question of, does the earth have its own agency? I remember I got pushback against this in a paper I gave at an academic conference. Genesis 1, I think it's verse 11, let the earth bring forth vegetation. And the earth brought forth vegetation. And I said, we need to take that seriously as a theological point to learn something from that. I got pushed back. No. That's bringing paganism into it. Well, it's in the Bible. I didn't make that up, right? So what can we learn from that? Well, we know that, humans have free will in the biggest sense of the word, whatever that means. It's problematic to define it. But we know that animals make choices also. Your dog makes choices. Elephants make choices. So animals have something analogous to free will. It's not quite the same as us. We use tools. Some animals use tools too. There are analogies in the non-human realm. But we even now know that underground fungi, which connect trees together, send messages to the trees. And one tree can tell another tree, a fire is coming, protect yourself. And we can actually, botanists have studied this. There is something like freedom. It's not our freedom. It's appropriate to biological organisms that are not human. So there are different levels of agency in creation. That is not paganism.
Right.
That is not Gaia. it's also not modern scientific absolutism, as if the world is a machine and we're the only free creatures. There's something about the non-human world that responds to God and to us, and that's legitimate, as long as we understand it's not the same as being human, right?
Right.
So I want to say there's something between these two extremes.
Mm-hmm. I've used the word so our professor Black Panther here up on the shelf behind me, Professor T'Challa, has an episode of Superhero Seminary on animals having souls, and the idea of that it's not pagan to see them as, and I like how you say not the same as human, like we're not brothers and sisters with gorillas or dolphins or whatever, but they're not complete, like there's some continuity, and the biblical authors they use the term for soul to describe it. I think I've used soulish. I kind of borrowed that from Watchman Nee, use it in a slightly different way than he means it, but when I look at, like, I mean, if you guys follow me on Instagram, I'm always sharing and posting things about orangutan rescues in Indonesia. I'm at my bucket list. I want to go play with a baby orangutan that's been orphaned and help rehabilitate at some point in my life, because I think they're just the most incredibly precious and adorable animals. And there's something inherently when you watch a mother orangutan or a mother mountain gorilla care for their infant, it's not just they're just responding to biological stimulus. Like there's something there. Not saying that, oh, well, therefore they're on the same level as humans. No, they're not the image of God, but there's something soulish to it. And in fact, Wright's going to mention at the end of this, I think it's the end of this chapter, he talks about the balance that Scripture holds, where the same proverb author that speaks of, it's right here, the bottom of page 453. He says, not surprising then that when the Old Testament comes to define the marks of a righteous person, it does not stop at practical concern for poor and needy humans, though that, of course, the dominant note. It is true that the righteous care about justice for the poor, Proverbs 29:7, but the sage also makes the warm-hearted observation that the righteous care for the needs of their animals, Proverbs 12:10. And it actually says the righteous person knows the soul of his animal. So there's something definitely, I agree, Richard, with what you're saying, that it's, I don't know how you'd say it in the way that aligns with what he's saying, but not deifying, but also not depersonalizing, like something in between.
I've known Christian philosophers who said that the non-human realm has anticipations of human agency. But they're not exactly the same, but they're like echoes, distant echoes. They anticipate it. Yeah.
I have to think about that more. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Kathleen, see your hand raised.
Yeah, I struggle with all three of these chapters quite a bit. The thing that I do not understand about this is, and my husband and I were organic farmers. I've been very concerned about the environment my whole life. But I do not, is he saying that somehow how we treat the earth now is going to impact the new earth someday in somehow? Like, are we preaching the gospel to the earth? Are we preaching the gospel to animals? I understand caring for them, but how is this part of preaching the gospel, living? I don't get the connection at all.
Well, I think right here, on page 431, starting point, our treatment of the earth reflects our attitude to its maker and the seriousness or otherwise with which we take what he has said about it. So that's kind of his starting point. What he's working from is, first of all, there's a line where he says at the end, the fact is that God, oh, wait, here we go. So on page 443, he says, our efforts therefore have a prophetic value in pointing toward the full cosmic realization of that truth. which is that ultimately the earth always has belonged and always will belong to God in Christ. Christ is sovereign. Christ is the creator. He's the sustainer. It's his world. So he says there's kind of a push-pull effect that we look back to creation and see whose it is, and then we look forward to the new creation and see what is intended. And that's where he quotes Isaiah 65, talking about this image. And he says, this is a vision that puts most New Age dreams in the shade. What New Age philosophy aspires to, the prophets were preaching that for millennia before. So sorry, this is zoomed in so close. So what I take him to be saying is how, like, we are, when Jesus says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we are supposed to be living out what the new creation is going to be, not just towards one another, but all of like towards all of creation. So that fuels this discussion that he has on page 446, talking about God and his care for the sparrows. And he said it'd be an utter distortion of scripture to argue that because God cares for us more than for the sparrows, which he does, we need not care for the sparrows at all, or that because we are of greater value than they are, they have no value at all. So in other words, if God himself has care for the flowers of the field or the sparrows, of course that we should as well. It shouldn't be, all that matters is you just preach the gospel. Preaching the gospel, caring for environment, caring for the world is part of what it means to preach the gospel. Because otherwise it's like you're telling somebody how great your landlord is while you're trashing the building that he owns. So I don't know. What else? What do you guys think? Gerda, I see your hand up. Let's hear your response. You got to unmute.
She's working on it.
She's getting there.
She's going to get it too, I can tell. She's determined. Are you on your phone, Gerda, or are you on a laptop? We can give her a minute.
Okay.
Richard, your hand is up. Do you want to talk while we're waiting for Gerda to?
Yeah, I'm gonna make it quick. I put it in the chat, but I should have just said it. So, the way how we are stewards or how we treat things is just, it's just the fruit of the spirit. Shouldn't it be just the fruit of the spirit? It's a byproduct of being saved. That's just, if we save, everything that comes out of us for the most part should reflect God and how we react.
So which fruit of the spirit, like in particular, how would you apply that to creation, caring for creation? Like what would be an example?
So I read it in here and I forgot which chapter it was, but it was saying as far as like how you treating the animals, you care. I think it was actually in one of the scriptures, but anyway, how one would treat the animals, treating the land and whatnot, especially under the old covenant, the way that they were supposed to treat the land and the animals.
Mm-hmm.
As things progress, just to keep things going, take good care of it.
Yeah, I think what he's, let me share this and then we'll we'll get back to Gerda in just a second. This is the passage I think that encapsulates what you're talking about, Richard, is when he says taking good care of the earth for Christ's sake. For Christ's sake, that's a key. Not just taking good care of the earth because whatever humanitarian reasons, but for Christ's sake is surely a fundamental dimension of the calling on all God's people to love him. It seems quite inexplicable to me that there are some Christians who claim to love and worship God, who claim to be disciples of Jesus, and yet have no concern for the earth, which bears his stamp of ownership and which he died to redeem. They do not care about the abuse of the earth, and indeed, by their wasteful and overconsumptive lifestyles, they contribute to it. If you love me, keep my commands, Jesus said Jesus, echoing, as he so often did, the practical, ethical devotion of Deuteronomy. And the Lord's commandments begin with the fundamental creation mandate given to humanity as a whole to work and care for the earth. Obedience to that command is as much a part of our human mission and duty as any of the other duties and responsibilities built into creation, such as the task of filling the earth, engaging in the rhythm of productive work and rest and marriage. Being Christian does not release us from being human. So that's kind of where I feel like he's getting it from, is the creation mandate from the beginning was steward and take care of. So we can't just say, well, I'm too busy preaching the gospel to bother with stewarding and taking care of God's creation. Okay, Gerda.
All right.
Can hear you. There we go.
You need to unmute at the bottom, not on the little red mute button on your picture. I'm going to ask a question. Do you think most of this chapter has been written to point out our lack of creation care or stewardship, however you want to look at it?
Our meaning who? Who's
let's just narrow it down to Christians or the church.
I think he's pushing back against. He mentions the article in Science magazine in 1967 that popularized the idea that Christians that Christians specifically are given biblical justification to destroy the earth, that the idea of fill the earth, subdue it, that is God telling Christians, do whatever you want with the earth, it's yours. And so there was heavy pushback against that in I think it's the 60s. I have to find the exact footnote. And so he's basically trying to say that's never been what Christianity has been about. That's a caricature of what Christianity has been about. And unfortunately, some Christians have even gone along with it. There have been preachers who have said, this whole world's going to burn. And you talk about 2 Peter. So it doesn't matter what we do. I mean, it was, I don't want to, I want to say it was Jerry Falwell Sr., but it might have, it was one other, Pat Robertson. It was either Pat Robertson or Jerry Falwell Sr. back in the 80s were kind of like preaching against environmental care and saying, it's all going to burn. None of that stuff matters. What matters is telling people about the gospel and getting souls to heaven.
Well, I'd like to quote a famous man, J. Richard Middleton, as he says, there are many Jews, but there are also many Christians. And so we don't always see, the world is the same. So I kind of got disappointed in the author of this book when, and I don't know this person very well, but he quotes Michael Gorman again on page 449. Mm-hmm. And toward the end of that, he said, the mission of the church as a foretaste of the coming new creation is charged with creation care now, not as an optional part of the church's mission for those politically left of center, but for the church simply as the church. And I found today a book that was written by Mark Stahl. Mm-hmm. And I found out it's in our library, but I can't get it, instantaneously. And he gives an overview history of at least Christians in this country who were very concerned about the environment. And in fact, I think, if you look at it, they were the only ones that really cared after, we had destroyed much of our forest and which went on till like the early 1800s. And they were, believe it or not, he mentioned the Calvinists were a great source of, inspiration for this. Mm-hmm. So I almost feel that, maybe it's been an oversimplification because there have been many people that have been interested in helping out the environment. I grew up in the 60s and went to college in the 70s. And Rachel Carson was a big person in, she was, put on a platform because she finally got through to a lot of people that DDT was not a good thing to use. And she came from a religious background. They said her father was a Presbyterian minister. So I think that a lot of people don't realize, or it just, maybe, they're quiet about, what they've done for the environment. And, I lived through, a lot of protests. And from the Vietnam War onward. And yes, some good things were done through government by people speaking up. But I think this is one of the hidden factors of the church. Even in the Old Testament, correct me if I'm wrong, but what, the seventh year you were supposed to leave the land fallow to get it, to renew itself. And so I think this is one subject that might be underserved, with just saying that, Christians just, they've never been, very interested in this. And I think that's, that's an undeserving impression.
I didn't get the feeling that Wright is saying that Christians haven't been caring. I think I got the feeling Wright is saying the world thinks Christians haven't been caring. And actually the gospel. Sorry, what?
My family came home, so.
Well, tell them we said hello and we can hear them.
Okay.
Louder. Hi, Gerda.
All right.
But Gerda, I think Wright would agree with you that, and he's just saying, if you polled people and said, hey, are evangelical Christians the ones who really care about the earth and the environment? I think most people would go, what? No, not those. They're the ones who said have dominion and do what you want. And, I feel like he's trying to correct that, but I don't know what the impression that somebody else got. Dean, I see your hands up. What say ye?
I guess when I kind of react against, just using the terminology creation care, I think what it is kind of a trap where non-Christians are trying to use our tendency towards morality, couching it in religious terms, and saying, instead of like being able to evaluate what the science actually says, they're telling us what the science says. And if you disagree with them, then you're not a moral person. And I think that's why I react against some of this. And maybe other people have that same kind of feeling. And it's more of a, do we really trust things? And I looked at, his 2006 book compared to the 25 edition, and he's actually gotten more strong with his, confirmation that everything is anthropomorphic or anthropogenic. For man's cause, and the science really isn't settled on that, but he's stating it as if it is. And I'm just a little bit, the theology of what he says and the why and the reasons, like solid. I think it's exactly right, but it's almost like the tendency of some Christians to find some sort of a concordism with science, whether it's creation ministries and things like that. I think it felt a little bit like that to me.
So you're specifically talking about anthropogenic climate catastrophe or climate change,
but just as an example. But because I'm old enough to remember global cooling and the scares about all of that, and all the predictions that have been made about we shouldn't have polar ice caps right now if everything was true. This New York should be underwater right now. If when he wrote the book, we had listened to the science at that point, but none of that has really come to pass. And so I just think we need a little bit maybe more nuance with being able to question the sources and not. I think people are using our Christian tendency to morality and enlisting us in their cause when it's not really truly care for the earth. It's care for some other agenda that they have, and they're just couching it in those terms.
What do you, what else? What do you guys think about?
Nathan's got his hand up.
Okay. Nathan, what's your take on it? Climate change. What do you think? I'm just kidding. No, tell us your You got to unmute yourself first, Nathan. You got to unmute yourself
Nathan, you're
first.
Muted.
Can't hear you. Got to unmute.
You're muted, Nathan.
Yeah,
There
you
you
think being in meetings all day, you'd think I'd know that. So this passage here on page 450 that we've kind of been talking around, where it talks about Christians being interested in caring for the world and the environment and whatnot, and how that seems to have not been what stuff you were just talking about. It reminded me of there's a, I forget what you call those little aside things in books that people write, but Carmen Imes had a little thing in her book on being God's image, on environmental care, and how it seems so logical and natural. It should be natural anyway for Christians to want to care for the environment. And she was wondering why it is that there seems to be conflict between environmentalists and Christians and this disagreement. And so I reached out to her and I said, a lot of it comes down to one of the highly influential philosophical views in environmentalism takes the view that the earth would be better off without humanity, right? And Christianity would really struggle with that view.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah. And that could create a philosophical fundamental conflict.
Yeah.
And a lot of people aren't aware of that approach. And it's not like everybody who's an environmentalist has that approach, but that approach has enough I don't know the right word. I'm struggling with my words tonight, probably because I've been working while we've been doing this. So I apologize for that too. But you get what I'm saying, right? That we need to reach out and we talk about, hey, we've got this holistic approach to creation, and and then they go, yeah, but you're Christians, so you can't really care. And we're like, what do you mean?
Right.
You want humans to disappear. What's up with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example of I think what he's warning against is the type of paganism, the type of environmentalism that says humans are not the created in the image of God. Humans aren't given dominion over the earth. He would say, no, the gospel pushes back against that hard and says, no, the reason the earth is valuable is because it's the creation of the sovereign God. And he has put us in a position with great power comes great responsibility. So we are to be exercising care over it. That he'd be like, yeah, that's where Christianity, the gospel pushes back against the various pagan forms of environmental care. And I think with Dean's comment, Dean, let me ask you this, because I hear what you're saying, and I actually think it illustrates what I was talking about earlier, where Christians are going to disagree on how to care for creation. Like, if you reject anthropogenic climate change, like if that's your position, you're like, look, from what I've seen, with the knowledge I have, I am not convinced at a factual level that humans are in any degree causing this. If you were convinced, like if there was data that changed your mind and you were like, oh, actually our contribution is not, regardless of what the predictions turn out to be or not be, our contribution is making things a little bit worse, whether it's really fast or whether it's over eons. Regardless, if you were convinced of that, I feel like you would say part of my mission as being a steward of creation is to not do that. If you were convinced of it. But if you're not convinced of it, then you're going to say, well, okay, that shouldn't be one of my concerns. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that'd be the case. And so the common ground is you both think we should care for creation as part of our mandate. You just disagree on what that consists of, or would you not?
And I think, I think what we're seeing though is a misspending of our resources and a denial of our ability to adapt to things that are changing naturally. So the UN Climate Initiative to study this has specifically excluded anything other than man-made causes. They don't even study. So all of the reports are only the science that is generated, and only the grants are doled out to people that are going to study the man-made causes,
yeah,
not the natural causes. And if you go back and look at COVID, and you see the immense reduction in human activity during that time period, and look at the minuscule, almost non-measurable effect on carbon dioxide, to think that they want to reduce that to a level that's insane when carbon dioxide is plant food. I'm just throwing a few things out here. I don't really want to get into a debate.
Right. Well,
but there's reasons
to keep us from not getting into a debate about the specifics, what I want to say is, if you did agree, though, let's say you were convinced that it was something that humans were contributing to, you would be like, yeah, we shouldn't do this. You're just not convinced that it is, and so that
we find a better way to mitigate it using our dollars instead of massively crippling economies and spending all this money on boondoggle projects. Right. When we could actually pump oil out of the ground, provide kerosene to people, and give them cooking fuel in Africa, so that they don't have to rip down the bush and make the Sahara. We could actually stop the spread of the Sahara by pumping oil. So, I mean, there's just different ways to think about it, but we're only told that there's one way. And I think we need to be more creative and not just be forced into just one paradigm that I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, you're for caring for the environment. You just think there's probably a better way to do it.
A cheaper way, more.
Yeah, just a more responsible, or that's what I'm trying to find is the common, because I am agnostic when it comes to the climate issue. I do not have the expertise to have a strong opinion on it, other than to the degree that we are harming the world, we shouldn't be. And I think that's a baseline where everybody would agree.
Absolutely.
We just would disagree on the nuts and bolts of it, or the strategy. And I
guess my problem is that we're not allowed to discuss it. We're not allowed to have the discussion, or we're a bad person. And that's where I see the problem. And it's not coming from Christopher Wright. This is just in our
wider
culture.
society. Yeah, it's a culture war issue. It's become a culture war issue. COVID was, vaccines were, all this stuff has unfortunately, and that gets people, riled up. We have to ask Cherie, we have to deal with this in the grown-ups table all the time, with people coming in and having their views and then realizing, oh, somebody doesn't agree with me and actually thinks my view is problematic. We have to try to keep the peace and
to the tune of 5,000 people.
Yeah, 5,000 people with their views.
Yeah.
Let's move on. We're not going to have as much time for group discussion tonight, and that's okay because we're doing it here. I see Jeffrey Hansen's hand raised, and there was somebody else who had
Lauren, I thought.
Yes, I saw Lauren.
Yeah, so I was just jumping through the.
Okay, let's go Jeffrey first, and then if Lauren still has a question, go ahead, Jeffrey.
All right. Well, first of all, I just thought it was interesting just tonight that these chapters seem to ruffle feathers a little bit more than some of the other ones, because there's a lot more discussion tonight. I think for me, I work in the protein industry. I work at a huge factory that slaughters pigs, and I guess whenever I was kind of working through this chapter, first of all, I've never heard a biblical defense for creation care. I think it's probably just because I lean conservative, and my algorithm is in that, probably in there. So I thought that was I thought it was really interesting, and it was ideas that I had never heard before, but something that I just thought of is when I think about my work environment, it's probably not considered by a lot of people as like the most environmental friendly industry, but on the other hand, it employs 2,000 people. A huge majority of them are immigrants. Provides money for people to pay their bills and to live, and so I just thought that there was kind of a what's the balance? I guess was the thing that I struggled with when reading it, because we all operate in a fallen world, and we have to live, and we have to pay our bills, and we have to do what we need to do to provide for our families and stuff. So that was kind of the thought that I had was, what's the line there, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you, when you have time, especially if you work in animal production, I was invited to a Christian veterinary conference probably about 6 or 7 years ago to speak on is all Christian vet school students and working veterinarians and in agriculture, not just like household pets, although some were that, but like people that work at meat production facilities, ranches, farming, all of that. And so that's a challenging thing. And I was supposed to come in and talk about, so the topic or the title was Animals and End Times. And it was what is the Bible, and particularly its eschatological view of new creation. And a lot of this, how does that permeate and how should that reflect to people whose job is involving animals, and those on the meat side and those on the vegetarian side. And so it's a very challenging, and it's a big group of like 100 or so vet students. So anyway, I say that to say, if you want more fodder to get the thoughts going on these issues, check out that episode. It's in, I can't remember which playlist it is, but it's called Animals and End Times. You can just YouTube that, search it. Part of what we dealt with in there was I had people who were like, I'm a vet at a factory farm. How can I be Jesus in this? Because I shared with them Richard Bauckham's book, The Bible and Ecology. We talked about that, and some of the observations he makes about farming versus or like, I don't know what you would call it without offending somebody, but I'm just going to say factory farming versus sustainable farming. Anyway, we got into a lot of that, had really good discussions, but it was a perfect illustration of the concept where Christians are going to end up having different convictions and different levels of agreement and different levels of comfort. And you're going to have some people who are vegetarian, some people who are vegan out of their Christian convictions. They're not saying everybody has to be, but they are. And then other people who are Christian meat producers, Christian butchers, and they operate out of their convictions. So there's just going to be disagreement. And our job is, do we at least see this whole area as part of our mission? Or do we just cordon it off and say, well, that's just how I earn my money. My mission is what I preach to people, how I do theology or whatever. So this section's kind of pushing those two worlds together in a way that's not always comfortable. I think it's a good thing, because we should live in some discomfort on a number of issues. I teach martial arts, like talk about people having problems with it, and MMA and jiu-jitsu, and people were like, how can you as a Christian, Jesus said turn the other cheek, and you're teaching people how to kick people in the head? Like, I get it. These are kind of discussions we should be having. Okay, Lauren,
I was gonna say Lauren was back and then we lost her again. So I don't know. Lauren, I guess last call here. I know
everything switched to the vegetarian vegan thing, and I come from Montana and everybody hunts here, and I have been called to task that how is that caring for the environment, caring for the animals, and when you can bring the other thing that you've got, like the Hindus, and they don't eat cows, and you have, all these sacred animals elsewhere. And how does that play into this? And that's kind of what ran through my mind. But we touched on the choice and the balance and vegetarian stuff. So that's why we didn't touch on hunting, but
it's a good there's I have not read it yet, but it's a book. I think it's called Nimrod, or so. It's a theology of hunting. And I've heard and interacted with people who are like, no, hunting, when done ethically, when done in a way that is sustainable, it's actually creation care. And so they, and other, I think we have to avoid the oversimplification of any position. So people that are like, oh, hunting is all, can it be something that's creation care? I think it can. I think that the Bible does speak to
I
that.
think that there's like population controls and things like that.
Oh yeah.
From it.
Yeah,
But there's
preventing
also,
disease, feeding people. Yeah.
yeah, and there is provision of food for people, but then you cannot make them sacred. But then I am in the process of moving off of a reservation to a new area in Montana. But there, when they kill something, they actually offer, they take a bite out of the heart and they offer it back to Father God. And I mean, there's a lot of it. How do you approach that? And then if they could say, well, your attitude is pretty calloused, so you obviously aren't taking care of the environment, that type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, we're always going to get pushback and people mischaracterizing whatever the position is. And that's, how can we justify what we do? I think that's the big question where we would all agree. If we're doing something that we are convicted about in our spirit, obviously we shouldn't be doing that. So can we live in a way that we are truly seeking to care for all of creation? This is not just, this chapter had a lot about environmentalism, but it's not limited to that. It's also care for human elements of creation, caring for people, caring for justice. It's a holistic thing.
As long as we have ribeyes, barbecue ribs, and bacon. Anyway, I'm just going to throw something out as a discussion and everybody can disagree. But since it's getting later, is there a way, since we've had such an open discussion here, that we don't go to breakouts tonight? Or is that breaking the rules?
No, I'm fine with it. Unless there's an overwhelming, you guys can put in the chat if you're dying to do breakouts. We've only got a few minutes left, but we have had a lot of good interactive discussion here.
And we have a smaller group. Over the weeks, we started out with 90 people. And so it wasn't feasible. Now we're sitting here with, 20 something.
26 of y'all. So we're.
Yeah. And it's been great discussion. So.
And you have another chapter left.
Yes. And this one, though, is not one that we're going to do a deep dive on because this chapter, and this one I think would be not nearly, I knew the last chapter would be the one that touches on the most culture war things, because unfortunately creation care has become a political football, and especially after, COVID and vaccines and climate change, all that stuff. Like, that's just a minefield. And you guys actually navigate it really well. Nobody yelled at each other, which is great. And so the chapter 15, I just want to give an overview because he basically said, it talked about the image of God. And a big point he made, and I said, see our friend Carmen Imes, her book, Being God's Image, for an example of this. But he talked about the image of God is not something that we possess it's not so much something we possess as what we are. To be human is to be the image of God. It's not an extra feature added onto our species. It is definitive of what it means to be human. And he's quoting from his Old Testament ethics for the people of God. But he's going to go on then to give 4 truths about humanity. If we are the image of God, what does the Bible teach about humanity? And so he gives 4 truths. And this chapter is 3 sections of 4 truths each. So I'm just going to buzz through these. Point 1, all humans are addressable by God. I love this line. God can speak to an Abimelech or a Balaam or a Nebuchadnezzar as easily as to an Abraham, a Moses, or a Daniel. There are always examples of God speaking outside of the covenant people of God. Sometimes he explains, sometimes he doesn't explain, sometimes they demonstrate a relationship, at least, they have knowledge of him, like Balaam, for instance. Sometimes they don't, Nebuchadnezzar. But all of humanity can be in relationship with God to some degree. He goes on then, number 2, all human beings are accountable to God. That flows from number 1, that because of this is why Amos can address God's accusations and punishment to the non-covenant nations around Israel. You don't get a pass just because you're not part of God's covenant people in terms of accountability. All human beings have dignity and equality. This is vastly different than in the ancient Near East, where only certain types of people were considered to be bearers of God, the image of the gods. And then number 4, therefore, the biblical gospel fits all. It's all encompassing. It relates to everyone. And it does not require people to become one ethnicity or one specific culture. He says conversion of the Gentiles to Christ did not mean conversion to being Jews. We talked about this in previous episodes. No, Gentiles as Gentiles were welcomed into God's people on the same basis as the Jews themselves. They were all saved by the gospel. So that was the first set of 4 truths. Then on page 465, he got into 4 truths about sin. So sin is what affects all of humanity. Here are 4 biblical dimensions of sin. That it affects every dimension of, it affects every dimension of humanity. So it affects people spiritually, mentally, physically, and socially. That all of these areas are what was touched in the fall. That means that sin affects human society and history. He has a discussion. I shared this on Instagram earlier this week. There's a discussion of, sorry, I can't fit the whole page in, but on pages 467 through 468, there's a discussion of what we would call structural sin or structural evil, that sin, he says, sorry for this is shaking around, but I can only see so much of it on the screen. He says sin spreads horizontally within society and propagates itself vertically between generations. So the idea that sin doesn't affect further than just our own lives, that there is such a thing as structural. When sinful people get together and do sinful things, that has a magnifying effect than just individual rights or wrongs that they might do towards one another. And that's a really challenging thing, but it's something that Scripture is pretty clear about, that the powers and the principalities and all of those things, human beings, Tower of Babel, like when human beings get together, they can do great things for good or for evil. So then the third point was that sin generates guilt and deserves God's judgment. That the Bible really does consider some things evil and needing to be judged. And it's not fundamentalism, or it's not hard-heartedness to agree with the biblical prophets, for instance, as they denounce evils and guilt. That's actual real thing. And then touching on the last chapter, that sin affects the whole environment of human life, like all of creation. He specifically says he's not going to enter into the question of whether the fall created like earthquakes and floods and volcanoes and tsunami. Like, that's a bigger discussion. But what everybody can agree on is that it's not just that every dimension of the human person is affected by sin. It's not just that every human person is a sinner. It's also the case that the totality of our social and economic relationships with each other, horizontally and historically, and our ecological relationship to the earth itself, have all been perverted and twisted by sin. That much is empirically and abundantly evident to anyone with eyes in their head and a conscience in their heart. So the idea is like sin is bigger than just my personal guilt before God, that it has societal and even environmental ramifications. And that's kind of what all of creation groaning, even if we disagree, like, are earthquakes sinful, or are they just normal way that the plate tectonics interact on God's good creation? Different theologies will answer that question differently. But then the last section, and this one is the most, to me, I was so glad he included this last section, is 4 truths then about wisdom literature. So he's talked about the law, he's talked about the historical books and the covenant with Abraham and all that stuff, and he's talked about the prophets. What he hasn't really spent a lot of time on in previous chapters is unpacking the relationship of wisdom literature to the mission of God. And so that's what the rest of, from page 471 to the end of the chapter, was all about wisdom literature, like specifically books like Ecclesiastes and Proverbs and Job. That these, there are 4 truths about these books that a lot of people struggle with in terms of how do we interpret, how do we live by. So the four truths about Old Testament wisdom literature is it deals with common human concerns. Like everybody in every culture deals with the things that Proverbs or Ecclesiastes wrestle with. It shows that God is welcoming to the wisdom of the nations. Some of the Proverbs are directly taken from Egyptian proverbial literature. There's a vast amount of overlap. And that's scripture says Solomon collected wisdom, and Proverbs were collected wisdom that were passed on. So it's not just, it's got to be unique in order for it to be true. All truth is God's truth. And God's common grace has guarantees that we can find echoes of God everywhere. And the wisdom literature keys in on that. There is uniqueness where he says, while there were unique dimensions to Israel's historical experience of God in revelation and redemption, that'd be the Exodus or the giving of the law, Israel had no monopoly on all things wise and good and true. Neither, of course, have Christians. We can find echoes of God's wisdom in other cultures. DiscipleDojo, this entire ministry was started when I looked during my final year of seminary. I started looking at the Japanese concept of Bushido, the samurai ethos, and what that paints a picture of in terms of discipleship. And there's a lot of echoes of biblical discipleship. It's just that the samurai were devoted to the wrong master. And so being able to then do what he says in point 3, which is confront the wisdom of the nations and critique it in order to provide, he says, a religious and moral disinfectant of Yahwistic monotheism. That the gospel can challenge and can kind of transform and remove the vestiges of the pagan vestiges, but keep the kernel of truth that's still communicated there. So then the last point, though, balances that out by saying, but wisdom literature, the bridge that wisdom literature builds is not in itself redemptive. The idea, wisdom literature, like all of Ecclesiastes, gets you to the beginning of Proverbs theologically, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So getting someone to recognize that is not the same as then the gospel message that provides the answers and what they need in terms of salvation and undoing the effects of sin and walking in covenant with the Lord. So anyway, we're just got like 2 or 3 minutes left, but those were he basically ends the chapter by saying wisdom literature advises, like the law and the prophets utter and give didactic material in a way that's, how does he say it? On page 478. This is, let me just not paraphrase him, I'll actually quote him. He says, comparing the law to wisdom literature and the prophets to wisdom literature, the law commands and prohibits on the basis of divine authority. Wisdom advises, warns, and persuades on the basis of experience, prudence, and unpleasant consequences. And then more than that, hold on. He says, at the end of the chapter, the fact is that the world poses some very hard questions for those who, in line with the whole biblical testimony, believe in one good, personal, sovereign God. Wisdom provides a license to think, to wrestle, to struggle, to protest, and to argue. So in wisdom literature, and then he closes out with expanding on that some. So wisdom literature, on our grown-ups table retreat 3 years ago, we studied together the book of Ecclesiastes, and that was the entire message of Ecclesiastes. Was like, this is in the book to show people that you are not just allowed, but encouraged to deeply question and to deeply wrestle with things when the world doesn't make sense. And to believe in, I think it was Chris Wright in his book on Ecclesiastes said, believe in a Genesis 1 and 2 God while living in a Genesis 3 world. And that's what wisdom literature does. And so it kind of provides a balance to the law and the prophets. And anyway, okay, we're almost out of time. Any
Right
questions or
now,
comments?
we don't have any hands raised or any questions in the chat.
Okay.
We did have unanimous support to skip the breakout sessions tonight, although we also had a shout out to how great they've been so far in the past sessions. But tonight was a nice, a nice change up.
Yeah, let me do this. Let me show on screen, and if you want to take a screen capture, you can. These were the questions that we were going to discuss. And because we do have people watching this as a video, when I upload this on YouTube, who are maybe doing this in a small group setting, the questions that you could discuss, if you are one of those people, the first question was going to be on holistic mission and the cathedral analogy on page 419. It was mentioned earlier in one of the questions. We were going to have you discuss what's the main point of that analogy of seeing the church as a magnificent cathedral, and what's he saying in that section. The second was when he says holistic mission then is not truly holistic if it includes only human beings and it excludes the rest of creation for whose reconciliation Christ shed his blood. And he quotes, I think, Colossians 1. So the question was going to be, what does this mean and how does it challenge how we view the gospel? This is what we discussed here together. So that's why I wasn't as urgent to do the breakout sessions. And then the last one was, we didn't touch on this much, but he talked about social, that we're created to be in social relationship. He says God's creative intention for human life right from the start and projected into the new creation includes social relationship. And since the fall devastated that relational dimension of human life, it is part of God's mission to restore healthy social relationships where they are broke through sin. And that should say broken, but that's a typo. So the question was going to be, what are some ways we can work towards this, repairing the brokenness of social relations in our own setting? And his discussion in the book had to do with marriage. But the point that he made, let me look, this was on page 464. We didn't touch on this, but I love it. I want to draw attention to it. He talked about the problem wasn't that, 463. Let me stop sharing for a minute. So he said, talking about it's not good for the man to be alone. The problem of this aloneness is not merely that he would therefore be lonely in an emotional sense. God is addressing not merely a psychological problem, but a creational one. And so he talks about how the woman was created to be an Azer, to come alongside the man, not just as, and this often gets preached as, marriage provides companionship, but he talks about, no, it's not just to provide a companion to stop him feeling lonely, but to find a helper, an Azer, to stand alongside him and equal to him in this huge task laid on him as the servant, keeper, filler, subduer, and ruler of creation. And he talks about the meaning of Azer, and we've talked a lot about that here on the channel, including our superhero seminary episode with Professor Wonder Woman, talking about an Azer. So that, I think that was really good, because as somebody who's not married, there's what I've seen through our grown-ups table ministry that we have. If you're not part of that, check us out on Facebook. What I've seen, I think Sheree could attest to this as well, is there is a craving for community, even among people who are not interested in being married. They've either been married or they're just not, they don't want to be, they gift of celibacy, or just they're, we have some people who identify as asexual. They have no desire for a sexual relationship or romantic relationship, but they need and they crave community, a social aspect, because we weren't created to be alone. So a good question to wrestle with is, what does that look like for someone who's married? What does that look like for someone who's single? And how can we live God's mission to restore broken social relationships, whatever position we find ourselves in? So those were, I see chats popping up, but I can't read them. I just see there's 58 notifications in the chat.
Yeah, everyone had a great time in the chat tonight. Really good comments and discussions, and thank you, David. Let's see. Yeah, everyone's just like, thanks. See you all next week for the ultimate session, Josiah.
Yes. Yeah, so we're coming down to the end, and I'm thankful to those of you who have persevered. Again, this is not a small book, it's not light reading, but it's challenging, it's encouraging, and it's giving all of us a bigger picture of the Bible and God's mission. And I think that's the strength of this book. So even when you find yourself like, oh, I don't agree with him on that. I pointed out, I think it was last session or the session before, a place where I disagree with him. Richard pushed back on something tonight. A number of you disagreed on some of the stuff in the ecology. That is good. That's a good thing because it means we're engaging, we're reading critically, we're interacting, we're not just imbibing. And man, we could use so much more of that. So we're going to, hopefully do more of this at Disciple Dojo in terms of future book clubs. But this takes a lot of work, and it's not the easiest thing to do. Yet, if there's a need for it and a desire for it, we want to continue that. So next week, last 2 chapters, and then a short little epilogue. Enjoy it. This should be, you're on the home stretch. Are there any last Jerry Springer final thoughts? Anybody old enough to remember Jerry Springer?
There's 3 more chats I haven't read yet. I wanted to read one that Richard posted earlier during the creation care conversation for anyone watching online, just because I think it's worth it. Regarding, if creation care isn't on par with sharing the gospel, then perhaps you might just, it's an oversimplification, but then why does it matter? And one of the comments he had here was the question of whether caring for the earth affects the new creation might be answered in terms of whether our works will survive judgment and follow us into the eschaton, 1 Corinthians 3:14. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul says, if anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. So I just thought that was a really good point to remember, that if we kind of do tend to get stuck on this, polarization of, black and white, all or nothing, that's just I thought that was worth reading. So before we wrap it up, and then we do have, the last 3 chats are just for fun. So,
well, piggybacking on that, that's a great verse. And absolutely, I agree with you on that, Richard, for sure. And I also think that Wright brings in Revelation, where it talks about in the new creation after judgment, the kings of the earth bringing their treasures. And most Revelation scholars that I know of, at least, they say that is an apocalyptic image of the good things of culture that survive that purging judgment fire. So the things that are good, true, and beautiful that are found throughout the world being refined and having the sinful and the pagan aspects burned away, but they remain. So the new creation, we don't go back to the garden. The new creation, the New Jerusalem, is a city, but it also has the imagery of Eden as well. So it's a garden and a city. Those were fairly antithetical in a lot of people's minds. But so I think that's would completely, those go together in terms of the image, a purging fire. He had the discussion about the passage in Peter that everything will be destroyed by fire. And he was saying, actually, most Peter commentators, there's a textual variant there, but most of them say, no, it's a purging. Everything will be tested or revealed, laid bare, I think is the term that's used, by fire, not destroyed, and God scraps it all and starts over. So anyway, wrestle with that, think about it, let it form whatever it forms in your minds and in your hearts. But I'm super thankful for you guys that have joined us and been on this journey. This is the first time I've ever done a book club, and it's certainly the first time doing it through Zoom. So thank you all for putting up with our hitches and our glitches.
One more time before we sign off here. Diana, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. You said, how do we download the chat? I said, you can't. I was wrong. Click on the top those three dots at the top right. You're going to have to do it fast because we're going to sign off here. But if you do that, there's an option to save the chat.
Oh.
So if you want to do that, feel free to do that right now because this is it. Hey, where's Archer, JM?
He is still asleep. Oh, wait. Is he getting up? All right, hold on. Somebody asked for a cameo. I got to take my headphones. I'm going to go get him. I'll be right back.
Okay, so while he's
download the chat while I'm doing this.
Yeah, anyone who wants to download, I just tried it. I cannot give you any details except that it says meeting saved, and I opened it up in my documents. Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, it saves it in, for me, it saves it in Notepad. So the whole thing is in there. So yeah, try that. And what other comments do we have? Nathan says, you're doing great, JM. And May says, I love this and thank you. Yeah. Oh, he missed it because JM was putting his ears in.
Yeah, sorry.
I was giving a compliment from Nathan. He says, you're doing great.
Oh, thanks, Nathan. So guys, this is Archer Ezekiel Smith. He is a Shih Tzu that was a puppy mill crated puppy. And I got him the week of St. Patrick. So he's got his little, he loves this boy. It's very crinkly. And it squeaks. But yeah, this is Archer. So we're working on potty training. We're going to go do this now. And you want to smell the mic? Yeah, he only barked once tonight while y'all were talking. And that was when somebody walked by my door out front. But yeah, this is the new Jiu-Jitsu Shih Tzu here at Disciple Dojo. So there you go.
Yeah. He's a stately one. That's my word for him. I just think he's just got that.
Very regal.
Yes, very regal.
Well, Shih Tzus were bred to be lap dogs for Chinese emperors, I believe. So they are very regal.
Yeah, he's a little guard dog too.
He's a good guy. Other than the bathroom thing, once we get that on track, he'll be the perfect dog, just like his predecessor. All right, did everybody download the chat that needed to?
No one said anything, but I'm assuming whoever wanted to did. So
all right. Well,
yeah.
It didn't download for me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who said that? Lauren, it didn't download for you?
Yeah.
I tell you what, Lauren, if you want to look me up, find me on Facebook or there's only one of me out there, I think. Just send me a DM or something. And I'll find a way to send it to you if you want to keep it.
Yeah, it's that I don't see the three dots and that someone else did said the same thing.
Oh, maximize the chat and close the participation. Do you have that? I mean, I'm just trying this I'm on a computer. I'm not on a Mac, I'm not on a phone. But it should say JM Smith's personal meeting room at the top, and then there should be three dots and then a little arrow icon and an X to close it. So if you don't see that, then I don't know how to help you because this is the only device I have.
Okay, well, I guess we might try to look up later.
I'm on my PC and it doesn't let me do it either. It might
Okay,
just be where you're admin.
Yeah.
Maybe.
admin.
Oh,
You know
it
what?
could
That's
be-
a
it could
possibility.
be as
Maybe
the
only I can
co-host.
do it. Okay, well, I've got it in my notepad. As long as I don't lose it, I'll try not to lose it. And maybe I can just email it out to you guys. And you
And
guys
this is we're cloud recording, so when it's done and Zoom sends me the files, I think the chat is one of the files. So
that's
I'll send that to Cherie,
can-
and then
yeah.
or I may put a link when I post this to YouTube.
Yeah, we can find a way to email it to y'all.
Yeah.
Thank you. That seems perfect.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, I'm gonna stop recording.